Okay, happy Sunday, everybody. It is April the 27th when I am, April 27th, 2025, when I am doing this. Want to do a follow-up to my video on isolationism versus globalism and talk about globalism. Last one I did isolationism, so I thought we'd talk about globalism a little bit. First question is, what is globalism? Where does it come from, and why do we have it? The answer basically is globalism is America's solution to World War II, the Great Depression, and the Soviet Union all rolled into one. Globalism is an American project. We created it, we paid for it, we set it up, we secured it, we built it to solve our problems. The first problem we had was that every time we turned around, we were getting sucked into another big war. Our isolationist strategy had failed. We'd lost hundreds of thousands of men. So we said, this does not work, we need something new. The second problem we had was we'd just gone through the Great Depression. We had the Hawley-Smoot Act, which was essentially a huge series of tariffs. It was an economic war on Europe that we lost, by the way, and we lost very badly. In 1936, we underwent another round of severe recession while we were still in the midst of the Great Depression. It was a huge disaster. And then our third problem, of course, is the Soviet Union, which was headed by Joseph Stalin. I know some people say, well, wasn't he our ally in World War II? Yeah, out of convenience. Joseph Stalin is every bit as evil and vile and murderous as Adolf Hitler ever was. And I would remind everyone, he was Hitler's most important ally for the first 2 years of World War II. He invaded Poland, he invaded the Baltic states, he invaded Finland, he forcibly annexed Bessarabia from Romania, he made extensive use of slave labor. It's funny, I see all these people talking about, oh, I'm so against slavery, but Joseph Stalin was a slaver. Don't make any mistake about that. So he terrified us, and with good reason. He was a terrifying individual. And so we had all these problems. We said, okay, we need a solution to them. And we came up with the most American solution imaginable. We put everybody into business with each other. Globalism starts in 1944 with the Bretton Woods Trade Agreement. We put together over 20 countries as we're coming to the end of World War II. And we say, everyone's going to start trading with everyone. And we're going to start knocking down a lot of these trade barriers, and we're all going to start doing business with each other. This is then followed up, at the Bretton Woods Conference, we also create the IMF and the World Bank. And the reason for that is that part of what brought Hitler to power in the early 30s was the impact of the Great Depression crashing Germany's economy. Germany's depression was even worse than America's. They got up to 35% unemployment. So, I mean, you think of how bad it was here. It was significantly worse there, which is just incredible to think about. So the idea of the IMF and the World Bank would be to help countries develop and also to have a way to rapidly stabilize economies so that we could prevent the kind of economic chaos that leads to a Adolf Hitler or a Russian Revolution, things like that. This is then followed up in 1947 with the Marshall Plan. Now, we think of the Marshall Plan as a big infrastructure project, and there's certainly some truth to that. But it was also very much a rewiring of how trade and banking in Europe work. We further knocked down trade barriers, and we further integrated Western European economies with each other and Western European finance and banking. This was then followed up by what was called Trizonia. At the end of World War II, Germany is divided into 4 different sectors of control between the British, the French, the Americans, and the Soviets. The Americans, the British, and the French, took a little while to get the French on board, eventually said, we're going to turn our 3 zones into a free trade zone. And it was wildly successful. The Soviets, of course, refused to participate. In 1952, the Europeans begin to figure out, hey, this is a really good idea, and this is really working well. And they come up with the Coal and Steel Union. And then in, I think it's 1958, they put together, I believe it's like the Eurozone, or it basically was the precursor to the European Unions, the first kind of Western European trade agreement that was not built by the Americans. But also, sorry, let me back up a little bit in terms of globalism. In 1947, we create NATO. We standardize militaries and defense and build an alliance network basically to contain the Russians. We also, at the beginning of 1945, or not really the beginning, but in 1945, we create the United Nations. And this was one of FDR's ideas. The reason for the United Nations, and if anyone wants to complain in the comments about, you know, how terrible and rotten the United Nations is, go ahead. There's a million valid complaints. I will not disagree with you. But FDR very correctly understood that one of the real problems with all these wars was once wars started to break out, everybody cut diplomatic communications with each other. And once the war started, there was no way to turn it off. You couldn't get the countries to talk to each other. So he said, we need a way that all the countries can talk to each other so that one, we can stop the war from happening, and two, if it does start, we have a way of communicating to turn it off, hence the United Nations. This is why, even though I will be the first to say there are a million problems with the UN and there are a million valid criticisms with it, I do not want the United States out of the UN. We have to have it because that is how countries talk to each other. And if you get to the diplomatic history of like World War I, World War II, the Napoleonic Wars, look at what was going on the diplomatic side, one of the biggest problems you have and why they couldn't stop these wars is they couldn't talk to each other. So the theme of globalism here is that it was institution building. The United States said, we are going to have everyone do business with each other, they're going to do trade with each other, and they're going to make money off of each other. This was hugely successful. This would eventually expand to parts of Latin America. It would expand all over East Asia. It would include places like Canada and Australia. The modern world that we know of, the world in which you can buy products from all over the globe, is all started by the United States, because our solution to war was business. It was to make war so expensive to your economy that you wouldn't dare do it. And by and large, it has been hugely successful. You may have heard of the McDonald's theory. No two countries with the McDonald's ever went to war. There is an exception to that when the United States invades Iraq. But by and large, that theory has held for several decades. The idea is that once you become a certain level, once you hit a certain level of economic integration, war becomes suicide. It doesn't matter if you win on the battlefield because you lose so badly economically. This is why I say it's the most American solution imaginable. We made everybody too rich to want to fight. This is why you see countries like Russia, North Korea, Iran, countries that are out of our trade networks, countries that are not part of the international banking accords, countries that are separate from all of this stuff, why they still have that much older mentality of let's go to war, let's invade, let's conquer, because they can't get into these institutions because they won't meet the criteria. It's also a way that we've brought about a great deal of democratic reform in other countries, is saying, hey, if you want a part of this very rich pie, you're going to have to make certain reforms. Vietnam is a great example of this. Vietnam's made all kinds of reforms. They've been joining into this, and they're getting richer and richer and richer. Now, relatively speaking, they're still fairly poor, but compared to where they were 25 years ago, oh my goodness, it's night and day the difference they've made. So globalism is an American project to prevent war, to contain Soviet expansion, and to stabilize economies to prevent the rise of another Hitler through good old-fashioned economics. So when people say, well, all these other countries are getting rich, that was the whole point. We wanted them to get rich. We wanted them to industrialize. We wanted them to make money. And what has that done for the United States? The answer is we have gotten richer and richer and richer and richer. This is not a politically popular point. The progressive left hates this point. The MAGA right hates this point. They want to believe that free trade and all this other stuff has ripped off and destroyed the American middle class. If you dive into the statistics and the data, the reason the American middle class is shrinking is not because they're getting too poor. It is because after adjusting for inflation, let me say that again, after adjusting for inflation, way too many middle class Americans have gotten too rich to be considered middle class anymore. A Chinese, I can't think of what business, but he was a CEO, was being interviewed just in the last few days, and he said, I don't understand what's going on with America. Why do you want our economy? We want your economy. We want the services, the technology, the information. It pays so much better than all this low-end manufacturing we're doing. He was just befuddled. He's like, why on earth do you want to go get our economy when we're doing everything we can to get your economy? And that gets into a conversation of, what is good electoral politics versus what is good national policy, because they are often very different things. But I hope this helps. I hope this gives you some idea. I have massively oversimplified, left out about 1 million details. But basically, globalism is America's response to World War II, to the rise of Hitler, to the rise of the Soviet Union. And it was our way that we stopped a lot of war and we got very rich in the process. I would say it's been a huge, huge success. Okay, bye-bye.